All right, thank you very much. Happy to speak here. Thank you, Danny, for that introduction, and love coming here to Freedom Talk. It's last time I was here was 2017, and this is just a huge turnout today. And I think what you guys in Canada here are experiencing post-election is what happened in the U.S. when Obama won in 2008. But there was a bright light at the end of the tunnel, and it turned out to be orange hair in the image of President Donald Trump. So in the U.S., we're very concerned about the next year to see how it goes. Every day is an excitement in America with the elections. But this is my talk. I'm going to be talking about kid indoctrination, but before we get into the kids, I wanted to give you an update from Washington on the latest on climate science. But a little bit about me first. Go ahead. This is my book. It's actually available on the back table there, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, and it's 6 printing. And I've had a lot of fun with this because even on Earth Day, it was outselling Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, and it's been a book that I've been trying to tell parents. Every kid from kindergarten through college, any parent with kids from that age needs to read it. I have a whole chapter on child indoctrination in it and what the climate movement, our government, academia, the funding sources are doing to kids in Hollywood, which we'll get into a little bit later on here today. The book is available. Also, just want to announce that we have the movie Climate Hustle, which we had a premiere here in Canada, in Calgary and Edmonton. It also played at the theaters in Toronto and several, and I believe the same cities of Edmonton and Calgary and maybe a couple others. Our movie is slated to come out next April, Climate Hustle 2. We have Climate Hustle 1 here, and then it'll be in even more theaters, and it'll be back in the US and Canada in theaters. And we're looking around Earth Day in April of 2020. So look out for that. This is some of the famous climate predictions that haven't come true. Between 1980 and 89, 4 billion people, 65 Americans will perish in the Great Die-Off, according to Paul Ehrlich. How many of you perished in the Great Die-Off? Do you know anyone who perished? Okay, a couple of you. Humans may only have 10 years left to save the planet. That was 2006. A lot of people had fun with that, the countdown clocks. Of course, what happened was they just erased the old deadline. Ocasio-Cortez, the Green New Deal pusher in the US. Now we have 12 years. Now it's down to 11 years. And in my book, I go back to the 19th century, to people warning about climatic excess. So it's been part of people's psyche about climate doom for centuries, and probably since people were on this planet. Next. I want to make a personal note. I know Patrick Moore is here. He'll be speaking tonight. This is a bright spot of what's happened recently in Washington. Patrick Moore and I had the honor of appearing with Patrick Moore as a witness at a House Natural Resources Committee when the new UN Climate Species Report came out. Patrick Moore handled the hard science on the species report, and I had fun with the UN politics. We got to go up against 3 UN bureaucrat scientists. One of them was Bob Watson, the former head of the United Nations IPCC. The hearing, and this is my favorite, this is from the Soros-funded Media Matters, Fox favorite climate deniers testify before Congress. And it turned out we ended up, I think go to the next panel. Well, we ended up, that's Bob Watson on the right. We ended up hijacking. There were just Patrick Moore and I against 4 witnesses, and the Democrats were in control. We ended up dominating the allotted time. The hearing went so bad for the Democrats, the chairman had to interrupt to give the other side a chance, and he felt so bad for them. The hearing was a complete disaster that the UN scientists 2 or 3 weeks later found another Democrat-controlled hearing, this time without me or Patrick Moore or I or any other skeptic of the report. They had to fly back to Washington, redo the hearing without us so that they could have a successful hearing. So next, and that's Patrick Moore there. So Patrick Moore, please stand up there, because I just think you can always tell when someone's effective by how much media outrage. The media, and I mean everyone from Newsweek to Rolling Stone to everyone, they were just outraged that Patrick Moore was even allowed on the stage and that we were given all that time. So go ahead next, Dave. So I'll just start with a few basic things. This is one of my favorite quotes, Philip Stott, the UK scientist. Climate change governed by hundreds of factors. The idea that we can manage it predictably by understanding and manipulating at the margins one politically selected factor, carbon dioxide, is as misguided as it gets. It's scientific nonsense, is actually what he says. So the idea that we can tweak somehow our energy emissions and come up with, predicted storms and floods and droughts and temperature centuries in advance is nonsense. Next. Just briefly here, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but the 97%, 77 anonymous scientists, according to one study. The other study, a UN lead author looked into it, and he said it was essentially pulled from thin air, not based on any credible research. But the 97% is very important. It gives every politician pushing climate action the excuse that they don't need to know a darn thing about the science, they don't have to study it. All they need to know is 97% of scientists agree. Next. Just a quick, there is no sign. I noticed Catherine McKenna, your minister recently I think she was pointing to floods in Canada as a reason for the necessity of the carbon tax, and the Trudeau government has pushed. But on global scales, floods, hurricanes, droughts, tornadoes, on every metric of extreme weather, there's either no trend or declining trends, and that is what is the reality. Even the United Nations admits that, buried into the report. Next. So I'm going to give you an update on the state of climate science in Washington. If you predict both outcomes, you're always right. And if you bet on a big sporting event, you bet both teams to win, you can go in the office next day and claim, hey, I predicted it. I know what I'm doing. So let's go. Next. Good. Next. Climate change causes less rain. Next. Climate change causes more rain, but less water. Next. Climate change means less snow. That is back in the 1990s and 2000. Next. Climate change means more snow. Global warming means more snow. This is Al Gore now says that more snow and blizzards are a sign of global warming, despite the fact he warned of the snows at Kilimanjaro and less snow disappearing. Next. Climate change causes Antarctica to lose ice. Climate change causes Antarctica to gain ice. Climate change causes duller autumn leaves. Climate change causes more colorful autumn leaves. Are you getting this? Climate change makes seas saltier. Climate change makes for less salty seas. It's a magic gas. CO2 can do anything. Next. Climate change increases the spread of malaria. But wait a minute, climate change also decreases the spread of malaria. This is all based on peer-reviewed literature, studies that then the media reports. I like the media headlines a lot better in most of these. Next. Dengue fever outbreaks will increase with climate change. But wait, climate change could decrease dengue fever. The U.S. will see more lightning due to global warming. Less lightning strikes. They could drop by 15% due to global warming. Climate change will make San Francisco foggier, but at the same time, climate change can make San Francisco less foggy. Take your pick. Ladies and gentlemen, lay your bets. Climate change makes causes more hurricanes. They said this during 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Next. But except when climate change causes less hurricanes. Now that's when we went to 13 years of not a single category 3 or larger landfalling hurricane. They started adjusting the science to make sense of what their failed predictions. So they just changed the predictions. Next. This is one of my favorite. New York Times, 2012. A cooler Earth produces climate stability. We will tax ourselves to better wealth through a carbon tax. A carbon tax would result in climate stability and prevent the end of life as we know it. Well, who would be opposed to a climate tax if it could prevent the end of life as we know it? But in 1976, the New York Times said warmer Earth produces climate stability. This is back in the global cooling era. Actual quote for the New York Times, June 29, 1976. Cool periods produce greater climate instability. Climatic events are then more extreme. They're blaming bad weather, extreme weather, on global cooling. Next. Climate will both increase and decrease fertility. Now, I'm going to get into this a little later in the talk, but a growing body of studies suggests it will have a both increasing and decreasing effect. So guess what? If fertility increases, we predicted it. If fertility decreases, we predicted it. They can't lose. They can't be falsified. Next. Before global warming caused terrorism, global cooling caused terrorism. This is a 1974 CIA report talking about how drought, famine is fueling political unrest, and it's due to the cooling temperatures. Global warming causes more crime. Climate change will be one of the major forces driving crime as the 20th century, as the century progresses. Now, keep in mind, crime is generally higher in the summer, lower in the winter, because people are out more and about in the summer, so you're gonna have more crime. That's what they're basing this on next. But wait, this is the key now. New York Times, it has to be true. It's in the New York Times. Lowering crime causes global warming. Now, what does that mean? Lowering crime can contribute to global warming. Next. Inmates consume less than the average in the country. So fewer prisoners might mean overall higher energy. So the more people in prison, the lower their carbon footprint. The New York Times actually has ink on their paper printing this kind of nonsense. Did you get? So global warming causes more crime. Reducing crime causes more global warming. And if you disagree with any of that, you are a climate denier who belong in jail. And who says you belong in jail? Bill Nye, the science guy. And he agrees with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who wants to see climate deniers at The Hague with 3 square meals and a cot with all the other criminals. War criminals is what he called them. And Bill Nye believes that climate deniers are affecting his quality of life. Next. So whether the ice caps melt or expand, this is mathematical physicist Dr. Frank Tipler. The climate theorists claim it confirms their theory, a perfect example of a pseudoscience like astrology. It's obvious that global warming is not science at all. When you make opposite predictions, and by the way, in my book, I have about, I think it's up to, it might be 40, 50, 60 number, and it's all the links, and I have the source. You can go actually to the peer-reviewed studies. This goes on and on. On almost every issue, they predict opposite results. Go ahead. So will global warming cause us to eat each other? This is another interesting, by 2040, this is Ted Turner, founder of CNN. Civilization we broke down, few people left will be living in a failed state like Somalia or Sudan. He's not the only one who believes this. Next. Paul Ehrlich, famous for this is actually the Swedish scientist, just this year. Cannibalism professor, eating human flesh will save the planet from climate change. This is not a hoax. This was a Swedish professor on live TV back in September of this year. This is the new memo, but it goes back a little ways. Go next. Overpopulation guru, Paul Ehrlich, climate change will force humans to eat the bodies of the dead. So here it is, climate denialism is leading to cannibalism. Next. So if you don't end up in jail, you could be eaten. Climate activists, but then if you're eaten, you die. Once you die, what happens to you? Well, now you're going to be condemned to hell unless you believe in the modern faith of global warming. New York Times columnist Paul Krugman, those who deny global warming, may you be punished in the afterlife for doing so. Climate denial is a, quote, almost inconceivable sin. Now, he did hedge. He said almost, so maybe it's not completely inconceivable. But this is the modern age where there's no belief in God, but this is how they won't believe in hell at all, except for climate deniers. Go ahead. Did someone say afterlife? Even when you die, you can't escape the clutches of global warming. Next. Global warming, Siberian corpses are allegedly melting, they could melt, and ooze contagious viruses out of the ground. Next. And can a carbon tax save the mummies? I believe this is in Argentina. They're causing the mummies to turn to black ooze. So even if you're just trying to rest in peace for all eternity, your body is still being used for global warming activists. Go back here. You're going forward, I think. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Next. All right. Now next. Okay. So this brings us to some more of 2019. It's brought what I'd call identity politics, wedge politics, more heavily invading the climate debate. These are all real headlines, real quotes. None of this is a spoof. What you're about to see is real. Or as Rudy Ray Moore, the comedian, used to say, I ain't lying. I'm not lying. Go ahead. Old people are blamed for causing global warming. Aging populations increases energy use, which increases global warming. This is a researcher, Massachusetts General Hospital. So old people are causing more global warming. Hate old people message. Next. Longtime climate activist David Roberts, a man who called for Nuremberg trials for climate skeptics, unleashes on his fellow climate activists. This is an activist. I'm sick to effing death of hearing white men drone on about climate, myself included. He's a white man. Next. The overwhelming whiteness of U.S. environmentalism is hobbling the fight against climate. Now, this is the left criticizing the left for being too white. Next. And then, it's not just white. If you happen to be a man, then you're guilty of toxic masculinity, and that's increasing climate change. White America, they condemned to hell. Warmest Bill McKibben, this is the activist, friends of Al Gore. White America has failed. They've fallen short by voting for climate deniers. This is a left-wing climate activist blaming white America for how they vote. Next. Environmentalists, left-wing environmentalists, have accused Leonardo Dicaprio of promoting white supremacy and a white savior complex. But it gets worse. Next. Scientists in Africa are blaming white people for causing the big hurricane that hit, I believe this is in Mozambique. Deadly hurricane, and he's basically saying that white people, and he's demanding reparations from the West for the hurricane damage. So you have all these people reading all this science, listening to the media, and they now believe that every bad storm is due to either the West, white people, toxic masculinity, old people, too many people being let out of jail. Next. Whites created the cyclone and therefore must pay. That's a group in, I believe, Mozambique. Next. Gore, in order to solve these problems, once had fertility management needed to reduce the number of Africans to help control. Now, Al Gore spoke at a Bill Gates event, and he said, Africa is projected to have more population than China and India combined. And he went on to talk about fertility management for that. Now, could a Republican conservative politician get away with saying there are too many Africans and we need to manage their fertility? I don't think so. Al Gore got away with it because he's on the right side of the global warming cause. Next. Now, if you're generically blaming white men or white America or old people, Trump 75, why not just say it? The Washington Post went, another hurricane is about to batter our coast. Trump is complicit. So now Trump is being blamed for a Category 4 hurricane that was hitting. This is earlier this year. Okay, it's not new. 1846, Australia, the Aborigines blamed the bad climate on the introduction of the white man in Australia. The Aborigines say the climate has undergone the change since the white man came in the country. So this is deep within human psyche to put this kind of blame and tie it to weather. This is one of my favorites. I went to the UN Climate Summit in Montreal, Canada. I believe it was Montreal. In 2005, men warm the globe, women feel the heat. The solution, climate, gender, justice. And this was ahead of their time because that's all we're dealing with now. Next. And then here's another one. This is Brian Schatz. I believe this is CNN asking about job openings for climate change experts for TV bookers. Who are your favorite non-white, non-men climate experts? That's what climate activist Eric Holtheis is acting, and that's my reply on Twitter. Why do they have to be non-white men climate experts? Do non-white men do different climate science than others? I'm confused. Of course, they never did answer me. And there's another one. This is a new study, Washington Post typing this. The whites are mainly to blame for air pollution, but blacks and Hispanics bear the burden. You see how everything's wedge politics, dividing Americans, pointing fingers. This is how they're going to justify interventionist government policies. If essentially certain groups of people are causing it, they're going to come in and say this is their justification, because these are the peer-reviewed science studies. Next. Blame white people, science says. And hey, if science says something, you have to go with it. Next. World War II, it's not just, this is not an interesting one. The World War II was blamed for weather extremes. This is back in 1941 paper, The Barrier Minor. Years of war tend to bring abnormal vagaries in the weather. Next. In 1933, the Syrians the government in Syria banned the yo-yo because they thought it caused drought. This is actual, I don't know, this was in my book and the movie. They blamed drought for the increase of yo-yos in the country, and they thought banning yo-yos could help. So is this really about the science? In the UN climate official, Edenhofer said, we redistribute the wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that this is environmental policy. So the United Nations top leaders admit this is not about the science. Next. And that's Otto and Edenhofer. Next. The UN, this is my favorite quote from the UK scientist, it's purely a political body posing as a scientific institution. Remember, the media likes to say the Nobel Prize-winning United Nations climate panel. It won the Peace Prize for political activism. Big difference. Next. I interviewed UN climate chief Cristina Figueres. She was at the UN Climate Summit in Germany, 2017. But I was asking her about these quotes. She said the UN is seeking a, quote, centralized transformation. And if you go down, it's going to make life of everyone on the planet very different. So this is the United Nations chief climate thing telling you that she seeks a centralized transformation that will make life very different for everyone on the planet. Gore admitted that the UN reports were, quote, torqued up. And I love Gore's excuse. This is last year. How else do they get the attention of policymakers around the world? Sure, if no one's paying attention, you just got to make the science that much more scary and alarming and just make scary predictions. So I know in Canada, you have the carbon tax, and everyone's like, well, it's going to cause this. It could hurt the economy here. It could hurt the energy sector. That's music to the ears of many climate activists, because at these UN summits, I see these people all the time. The recession is planned. They hold meetings on this. Next. We interviewed Kevin Anderson. This is a guy who stopped showering, first of all, to help fight climate change. He thinks that showering regularly is a very bad thing. But he also wants planned recessions. And this is an actual movement now. It's called the degrowth movement. Next. Professor Alice Larkin-Bowles, who's from the Tyndale Institute in UK. Economic growth needs to be exchanged for planned austerity. Now, think about it. What are carbon taxes, cap and trade, the Green New Deal, but giant planned recessions for many decades into the future? So if you argue, wait a minute, that's going to cause a recession, that's kind of like ding, ding, ding. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. You always tell, when you go to these UN conferences, you can always see what everyone's going to be talking about. Now, this is George Monbiot, UK environmentalist, the key advisor to Greta Thunberg. And this is actually in our sequel of Climate Hustle 2 coming up. We've got to go, this is George Monbiot, we got to go straight to the heart of capitalism and overthrow it. He said eating meat is like a loaded gun at the planet. Greta Thunberg and all the kids activists, this is like their spiritual leader. He's advising her on everything she should do. This is at the heart of the movement. Next. Controlling carbon is a bureaucrat's dream. This is Richard Lindzen's quote. If you control carbon, you control life. Think about it. Every aspect. Humans inhale oxygen, we exhale carbon dioxide. And we're giving government the expanding power of this by declaring such climate emergencies. Next. So what's happening now politically in Washington and the world, ban and centrally plan. Everything, plastic straws, fracking, coal plants, light bulbs, oil drilling, meat, and it goes on and on. The UN, not only did they do their species report, but they also came out with a meat report. And it was scaring everyone about eating meat and how methane and all this was going to destroy the planet. Al Gore is now invested. He's on a quest to be the world's first fake meat billionaire. His company, Beyond Meat, is poised. Al Gore invested in this. He had the biggest IPO opening in the United States last year, and it's all based on the coming meat bans and probably subsidies for the fake meat. These fake meat burgers at Burger King and other places, at least in the US, some of them exceed 22 different ingredients. They're highly processed. Nutritionists say they make no sense. You're better off with lean turkey meat in terms of nutrition, but it's an ideological religious fervor that if you eat a fake meat processed burger with pea proteins and starches and all these other ingredients, you're saving the planet. Next. This is one of the Democrat presidential candidates. Elimination of car ownership in the US is being proposed. And these are scary proposals. They're talking about, Al Gore's talked about it for decades, banning the internal combustion engine. But they're talking about a roving fleet of electric cars that people can sort of, zip car. You just sort of go rent a car for a few hours and you got to return it. But you're not allowed to own a car yourself. Next. The Green New Deal. Now, if it did face the climate catastrophe, no impact. I just want to run through this, and you cannot distinguish it, assuming they're right on the science and assuming their projections of how they're going to impact the energy emissions. It wouldn't even impact the science, so it fails a basic cost-benefit analysis. Next. This is one of my favorite quotes, University of Pennsylvania. None of the strategies offered by the US government or the EPA or the EUN or anyone else has the remotest chance of altering the climate even if it's in fact controlled by carbon dioxide. And this is the key point. This has to be hammered home. It's not about what if climate skeptics are wrong, we need an insurance policy, is that they absolutely have no hope. We're all doomed if we have to rely on the UN or carbon taxes or Green New Deals to save us. Carbon taxes increase global CO2 emissions, period. This is Spencer Morrison, National Economics editorial. Next. And this adopting carbon taxes will actually raise global emissions by offshoring economic activity from environmentally friendly places to other places, to non-environmentally friendly places. An example of this, we have a person at CFAC named Paul Dreesen who did a presentation. We were at Georgetown University in September. And we were, first of all, shut down, booed. The activists came in, stood on stage, sang songs. Police had to come. The event was shut down for almost an hour and a half. Campus police said they never saw anything like it. And it was the same day that the Democratic candidates were on campus who were not interrupted having a climate forum. But one of the key things he did, it silenced the audience of these young teenage protesters in early 20s. He talked about how because of the mining restrictions and because of all the solar panel demand and the subsidies going to them, all these Chinese companies are running African mining companies, and Amnesty International and other groups are saying the increase in child labor, slave labor, has gone through the roof, and child workplace violations and kids working because they're allowed to do all that mining and it's run by Chinese company and monies. And this is one of the things that happens. All we're essentially doing is punting responsible environmental policy and industrial energy extraction to places that don't have it and don't care about it. Next. The other weird thing that's happening is now we have major government officials claiming that any kind of cooler weather or good weather is due to all the green energy mandates and their carbon taxes and policies, which makes no sense because emissions are still going up globally. So next. This is the UK Environmental Ministry. The temperature of the Earth may have slowed down, but that's a good thing. Some of the measures we are taking today is helping that to occur. Next. The UN has got into, I call it modern witchcraft. Top UN official Patricia Espinosa actually said that the UN regulations are helping change the weather. They're changing the weather. This is what they actually believe. They have this power. Next. So a warning to you, now I'm going to switch into the kids thing. This is what they always say we should look, in the United States, we always hear we should look to Europe. Europe is so advanced, so far advanced on climate policy. The same is true in Canada. You guys are heading right to where Europe is. This is, and not only are they having problems throughout Germany, England, all these green energy mandates are hitting the fan now, but the era of constant electricity, go to the next panel, families get used to electricity only when it's available. They may be coming to an end. This is what happens when you don't take energy that's been proven and you start banning energy that works and mandating energy that's unproven. And that's what we're facing here. People are gonna have to change their behavior, but this is ideally a good thing. No, the committed climate activists, Extinction Rebellion, Green New Deal activists, they would look at this and say, that's what needs to happen. We can't be putting on electricity anytime we want it. It needs to be rationed. It needs to be managed. We need bureaucrats in charge of every aspect of our lives. Next, to save the planet. So kids indoctrination. Let's start from the top here. This is Leonardo Dicaprio. Now, Leonardo DiCaprio is not just a Hollywood celebrity. He has been chosen by the United Nations as the special ambassador to global warming. He speaks at the UN headquarters in New York City. He travels to events representing the United Nations climate policy. He has said, and I quote, "We need to get kids young in order to make them climate activists." So this is their stated goal. Next. This is Al Gore's producer of An Inconvenient Truth, Lori David. "We want you to grow up to be activists." She's specifically talking to kids about climate. So, have they been successful? Next. Greta Thunberg, this is going up in San Francisco. It's kind of odd. That's a new mural going up. It's actually up in San Francisco, and it's a lot of people are very disturbed by it. Let's just say because it's a weird image. It's a weird painting likeness of her, but it's she has now replaced Al Gore, Leonardo DiCaprio, everyone else as the face of the climate activist movement. Next. Her message, "I want you to feel the fear that I feel." This is Greta. "This is my cry for help. Why should we be studying for a future that's soon to be no more?" And she uses the IPC. She testified in front of the US Congress. Her testimony included a copy of the latest IPCC report. It was almost as if she was delivering the sacred tablets to the United States Congress that no one could argue with. And there were others that testified along with her. Seattle teen, Jamie Margolis. These are the Green New Deal generation. The Green New Deal generation, they call themselves. This is the message that they've received from all the media, academia, Hollywood. It doesn't matter how talented we are. She's talking about teenagers, how much work we put in, how many dreams we have. The reality is we've been committed to a planet that is collapsing. They believe this with all of their heart. Next. Solving the climate crisis goes against what America is built on. Now, remember I had some fun talking about white America and all the white people blaming and toxic masculinity. The message gets to the teenagers. This is in front of the United States Capitol. Our planet is collapsing. Solving the climate crisis goes against what America was built on: colonialism, slavery, and natural resource extraction. They got the message from all of this study and media hype. It's not just a punchline. So the kids now believe that the entire legacy of the Industrial Revolution has been nothing but a disaster, and that they're being punished for it. One girl actually, I think I have the next quote. Let's see, the next one. No, go back a second. One of the actual testifiers said, "My planet's generation trashed the planet, and now they've left it to us." And she actually said, "Thanks, Mom and Dad." It's actually turning kids against their parents. Next. So then what they're doing is they're recruiting kids right now for lawsuits. Teenagers are taking global warming to court. Now, this isn't just like, oh, some environmental law firm is doing this. No, this has the stamp of approval. I'm having a little fun here. Children of the Gore instead of Children of the Corn. They filed a global warming lawsuit. James Hansen, go to the next. James Hansen, I don't know if I have it up here, but James Hansen, the former NASA lead global warming scientist, has been instrumental in all these lawsuits against the government. And we have a whole section in our sequel, Climate Hustle 2, where the kids are saying that we're going to go to court, prove that President Trump is a climate denier, and we are suing because the government has not done anything to stop global warming. The government's endangering their future. Greta Thunberg, this is one of my favorite things there. She is so afraid of modern technology. She actually said the UN climate summits moved from Chile to Madrid. And by the way, it started in Brazil, was supposed to be. The Brazilian Trump, Bolsonaro, said, hell no, I'm not going to have a UN climate summit. So Chile raises their hand and says, oh, we're following all the green policies of the UN. We're the model country. We'll love to showcase all our green efforts. So they schedule it for Chile. And then, due to all their green, in part, major part, due to all their green energy policies, there's all kinds of riots, people getting killed, unrest in the country as the carbon taxes, transportation costs, fuel costs all go through the roof. So they had to cancel it. So then it goes to Madrid, which leaves Greta Thunberg in a quandary. She had come over on a yacht which was made out of plastic and had diesel backup, and then her crew flew back, but she was able to come on a yacht over the Atlantic. She had to figure out how to get back from the US to Madrid. So she said, I've traveled around the world the wrong way. I need to find a way to cross it. So my favorite answer was Tony Heller of Real Climate Science, a fellow climate skeptic. Go ahead, next. Dear Greta, she's trying to figure out how to get across the Atlantic. Over 100 years ago, humans developed a new technology called the airplane. They run off fossil fuels and can get you to Madrid in a few hours. If you attended school, you might have learned this. And I thought that was perfect because we have people like New York Times reporter Andrew Revkin, former New York Times reporter, who actually on Twitter was trying to get people motivated, saying, let's all batch buy a bunch of carbon offsets so Greta can justify flying to Madrid. They were trying to find ways that she could actually just fly without having to go. It's a torturous yacht trip. I know it sounds great to go on a yacht, but you're going over the stormy Atlantic in late November, and it's a miserable trip because these are not that big of boats. But this is the New York Times former reporter saying that carbon offsets, some kind of indulgence, are going to make her take a plane. But anyway, she's ended up taking this. She's going to set sail on a new plastic yacht. And it's going to have 2 diesel backup motors, and it's going to be the same. And I'm sure the crew's probably going to end up flying somewhere after it's over. So it's going to be all virtue signaling. Next. 60 Minutes has been presenting, I love this, a 60 Minutes producer said, these kids aren't talking gobbledygook. 60 Minutes, CBS News in the US has been promoting these kids' lawsuit. And I love this. The evidence they presented is a 15-year-old girl on air said she put her ankle in climate change after her house flooded. And that's a direct quote. This is what the evidence that the United States courts and maybe even the Supreme Court are going to be hearing. What evidence do you have for the climate catastrophe? Well, our 15-year-old put her ankle in climate change. In other words, her house flooded, which she blamed on climate change. Therefore, that's how she did it. So the 60 Minutes has been going through and profiling all these kid activists. They're well-funded. They're tied in with NASA's James Hansen. Go next. So then what happens to these kids when they get all of this fear, panic? They're testifying on Congress. They basically have no future. One of the kids said, anyone who tells me I have a future is a liar. I think I have that coming up. Climate grief. This is NBC News story, the growing emotional toll of climate change. Well, first of all, climate change isn't causing any emotional toll, but the fear and the indoctrination from kindergarten through college and Hollywood and academia and the media is. Next. This is another one, the UK paper, I call it the Greta effect. Rising number of children treated for eco-anxiety, fear climate doom. We're all going to die. Next. Global warming causing an increase in ecological grief. Now, you can't argue with this. Peer-reviewed study in the journal Nature Climate Change. This is the hallowed halls of peer review. Ecological grief is a mental health response to climate-related loss. So in other words, what they've done is very simple. Any bad weather event on the planet is due to climate change. Therefore, and now they're hyping every little event, putting it on the headlines, putting it in the studies, putting it in everyone's fears. So they're saying that this bad weather is causing this ecological grief. Next. My brain goes insane. The rise and fall of mental illness among teenagers. Next. 1984 arrives in the 20th century. This is the George Orwell book. Who controls the funding controls the science. It is unbelievable. You know, the whole concept of the 97%, you could have a butterfly scientist who's never studied carbon dioxide, but if he does a study on how butterflies might, maybe could be affected in the year 2080 in the southwestern United States, and he gets it published, suddenly you have local news and climate activists, newsletters, and then eventually the Associated Press and the CNN and New York Times. Butterflies doomed due to global warming. New study says it. Bad news for butterflies. Suddenly that scientist, who no one paid attention to and wasn't getting much funding, is invited to Bali, Cancun, South America, to exotic UN climate summits. He's getting now a book deal. He's getting media interviews. He's getting grants. He's getting a big staff. He's getting student PhD candidates. This is how it works. And then they can say, this butterfly scientist is one of the 97%. Who are you to go against all these scientists? And the scientist, all he did is make a predictive model study, not based on anything, saying this could, might, may happen. The next one, go back one more. Who controls the curriculum controls the student. At CFACT here, Craig Rucker and I we've been in different places testifying against the Common Core curriculum, which I don't know if you have that in Canada. Go next. And it's a group called Achieve, which is writing these standards, is actually funded by ExxonMobil and Chevron. And we went to West Virginia to testify against this. And what they were doing was telling kids, mandated in the new textbooks, that there is no debate, there is no dissent on climate, that the temperature has been going up relentlessly, that it's all due to man, that there's no doubt, there's nothing. And so we went to testify to say we need to at least have the idea that there's doubt. And we ended up winning that one battle in West Virginia, but it's a very battle because you got to go not only state by state, but county by county, school district by school district. You're fighting teachers' unions, you're fighting all the other activists. This is the National Center for Science Education. The people on the board of this, writing the kids' education, are people like Bill McKibben, the guy I just told you who said white America has failed by voting for climate deniers, and Michael Mann, the Penn State ClimateGate professor, infamous for the hockey stick, which has been completely debunked. Soros gave global warming strike partners more than $24 million. 16-year-old Greta Thunberg's become the face of the movement. But behind the scenes, not only the Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg, other groups, all these youth groups are being massively funded. Soros spends nearly $1 billion a year on different left-wing causes, and climate is one of his big pet causes. Next. Greta's very corporate climate crusade. Now, what's behind Greta? Her parents want you to think she's a spontaneous thing that just started activism. This was planned. The Swedish, they were well-connected Swedish parliament members. This was a movement that started, but if you look behind the scenes, they call it a shadowy cabal of lobbyists, investors, energy companies seeking to profit from a green bonanza. Because ultimately, this means more money, more redirecting of money, more wealth redistribution to people government deems worthy. The Greta phenomenon is, the companies are preparing for the biggest bonanza. Greta, whether she or her parents know it, is the face of the political strategy of this whole new, well-funded movement. Next. So the question now, should we be having kids in the age of climate change? Interestingly enough, they love to have our kids grow up to be activists. They love to get them young and get them indoctrinated. They love to get him involved in lawsuits. They love to get him to testify in Congress. They love to scare the hell out of him. They love to cause him massive anxiety. But then at the same time, they're like, should we even be having kids? They don't want you to have them. Would you think they'd want you to have them because they're so successful indoctrinating them? Next. So this is a study toward a smaller family, and it's called now Climate Change and Overpopulation are affecting the morality of procreation. It's immoral to want to have kids. And I think it was the Sierra Club who actually had a proposal where you had to, they're thinking in the future where you're going to have to like apply to the government to have kids. Because the idea is they're calling for carbon taxes for kids. Go to the next one. NPR, National Public Radio, lectures about selfish moms having kids in the age of climate change. So no longer, if you're having a kid, it's, people are gonna be like, well, have you done, they're looking for you to pay offsets, you better vote the right way, you better see what car you have, what's your thermos, how dare you have a kid? Next. AOC, Akasha Cortez gets choked up. My dreams of motherhood are now bittersweet. On one hand, she wants to have kids. On the other, how could she have kids when there's such a climate disaster? There's a climate emergency. Kids would only add to that. Next. So Earth needs fewer people to beat the climate crisis, scientists say. Now again, are you a scientist? Well then, how do you dispute what scientists say? Scientists say, but wait, you need fewer people to solve the crisis? Hold on, go ahead. Next. Climate change could make humans extinct, warns a health expert. So wait a minute. We're afraid to have kids because it'll worsen global warming, but if global warming gets worse, it'll make us extinct. Okay, next. Harrison Ford has warned without the Paris Agreement, the human race will go extinct. There won't be any bleep people. So wait a minute, then what's wrong with having kids? It seems like we'd want to stave off that extinction, wouldn't we? Next. Psychology Today magazine, millions suffer from the phenomena of climate denial. They warn that the human race faces extinction. Next. So we're facing extinction, but here's the good news. The BBC says sperm count drop could make humans go extinct. So multiple forces at play making us go extinct, yet they don't want us to have kids. I'm confused. Next. Climate change kills the mood. Bang. This is it. Now, if you're really worried about global warming and having kids causing it worse, don't worry, because as global warming gets worse, you won't even be in the mood to procreate. And we know that because scientists say. Next. So let's review. Climate activists, including UN, has warned overpopulation will make humans extinct. If we allow the alleged climate emergency to run its course, it will also cause human extinction. So it sounds like we do nothing and the problem will solve itself. More kids cause more global warming causes us to go extinct. It all balances out. And another thing is, this is a grown-up now. Climate change and Trump have driven me to therapy. To me, this is the ultimate of success. This is why all hail President Donald Trump's climate and energy policies. When you can drive someone to therapy for that, that's an awesome thing. Okay, no, next. This is Al Gore's producer. Remember the one who says, I want you to grow up to be activists? After Trump's election, she said, it took me 2 weeks to stop crying. Well, that's when you know that your policies are effective. Now, just wait a minute. Before you think, okay, Trump caused her to cry. In 2006, Lori David cried for 3 days. This is Al Gore's producer of Inconvenient Truth. 3 days when presidential candidate John Kerry, this is 2004, lost in the presidency in 2004. She did was take to her bed and cry for 3 days and 3 nights. Now in 2007, she actually, her climate awakening, I remember crying every day at 5 in the afternoon. She started reading UN reports and realizing the hypocrisy of Hollywood. So she has a history of crying, but it's nice to see that Trump can make her cry because that means that he's doing something. Next. So here's finally the solution. I'll end on this and then I'll take Q&A. This is an actual article and this is in Vice magazine. If everyone tripped on psychedelics, we'd do more about climate change. In the 60s and 70s, frequent use of psychedelic drugs coincided with widespread environmental movements. This is actually now, Vice magazine is a mainstream publication of the American left. It's cited, and this is not a silly article, it was not a spoof. They're actually saying that psychedelics inspire people to act pro-environmentally. And look, I love this. It says, after taking LSD, Bill stood in his kitchen in England staring at a large tree. And then, of course, the tree started doing all weird stuff. But this is where we are. We also have a man in our sequel. We have many interviews with Matthew Lau, NYU ethics professor, who's proposing pharmacological enhancements to make people, to increase altruism about the environment. In other words, if you're a climate denier, they're going to medicate you. He's talking about how to medicate people to make them care about the environment. And who knows, it could be mushrooms. That could be the solution. So, and oddly enough, because of the greening of the earth due to rising CO2, mushrooms, along with trees and other crops, are continuing to boom. We have a greening of the earth. Deserts are turning green because of rising CO2 in the atmosphere. And so there'll be plenty of mushrooms and psychedelic drugs, I'm sure, if Vice magazine has its way. So with that, next one. Next. So with that, my parent organization is CFAC, Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. We also have a division called Collegiates for a Constructive Tomorrow. And that is what shows you the challenge when it comes to young people. 7 years ago, 10 years ago, speaking on universities to the conservative libertarian groups in America, they were with you. And you didn't have to convince them of anything on global warming. The last 2 to 3 years, unbelievable. As kids are coming up from kindergarten all the way to college, indoctrinated on climate, they're shocked to find out that there's even a single scientist that disagrees, that there's any data that's contrary. They are so indoctrinated, even conservative kids that believe in this. So that's what, our mission is, going on college campuses and trying to get the scientific truth to these kids. Next. That's my contact information. So with that, I think